Hi, I'm Brian Nixon. I'm privileged to be here today with Paul Zachary, an engineer who has done some fascinating work in the book of Genesis, using engineering principles to show us that science and the Bible work in harmony. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us about yourself, your engineering background, to give our viewers a sense of who you are and some of the work you've done in engineering.
Sure. I've been in engineering for about 35 years, and various companies and countries, several years in Europe, and most recently I was working on the 787 airplane for Boeing, and so covered a wide variety of different products, different applications.
Though that's been your professional life, your love on another level was to look at Genesis and use engineering principles to assess and analyze Genesis. Is that correct?
Yes, to see what the fuss was. To say, hey, there's a lot of controversy on this, and so look at it and see, well, I'll take a look at that from an engineering standpoint and use engineering principles and look at the latest formulas and theories about time, space, primarily from Einstein, and see from an engineer's perspective what the dilemma between the two looks like.
Yeah, and the fuss or dilemma that you're referring to is, on one hand, you have people saying that the Earth is young, sometimes 10,000, or how they define it as 10,000-year-old. And on the other hand, we have someone who says the Earth is billions of years old. And what you have found by applying these formula is that it's not either or, but it's and both. That there's a confluence, there's an agreement between the Bible, the 6 literal days, as well as the billions of year time frame. Is that correct?
What came out of this is that God laid out in Genesis exactly how he did it, and now that we know the latest theories, now facts, that God was right all along. And he gave us this information in his introduction of himself to humans, called Genesis 1. And he laid it all out the way he experienced it. And now that we can look at it with an understanding of where he was when he was creating the universe, we can understand and find, much to a lot of people's surprise, that there is no discord between the two. They, in fact, match.
So there's some preliminary knowledge that we need before we tackle Genesis 1. And I'm going to call this knowledge signposts. So signpost number 1 is we need to understand the time frame difference, or the vantage point, or the viewpoint between what we would say an on-earth viewpoint versus God's viewpoint. Could you describe the difference between God's viewpoint and an on-earth viewpoint?
Sure. What Einstein told us is, if you have 2 events occurring, one is occurring at close to or more than half the speed of light, and relative to the other location, then you have to take time dilation into account. And time dilation is a way of talking about the rate of passage of time in a particular location, so that time passes more slowly or quicker, if you would, at a different location as observed from the person at the first location. This is not new. As I said, it runs back to the 1900s. This has been dabbled in the media. If you're familiar with such scientific sci-fi movies as The Aliens, and movies such as that, when you have a person traveling in a spaceship, then you get time dilation between that person and the base that he had traveled from.
Or like Buck Rogers, where Buck Rogers goes back and he goes back to the future, and people are older and he's still young.
Right. Buck Rogers is a little far back in the time frame. That was shortly after the Big Bang. But the movie Aliens, Ripley left the base and traveled to the other planet. And when she left, her daughter was 18 years. And when she came back, her daughter had died of natural causes. Mm-hmm. And Ripley was astounded because for her, the amount of time that had passed was only a couple of months. But at that the other location, it was many years. So it's been, the concept has been out there, mostly in science fiction. But it's a recognized concept. Mm-hmm. And so when I looked at this, I realized that that's a concept that I would have to take into account.
Mm-hmm. So if signpost number one is the time frames, the varying time frames of how we would view it from Earth and how God views it from, let's call, say, the universe, these time frames are important for us to understand what you're going to explain to us.
Well, Brian, I kind of use the, I would say it, the experiences. You experience time at one location, and you experience the rate of passage of time at that location. And so I think of it of where you experience what is happening in your local environment. And yes, we have to consider where those two environments are, and if there is a difference in those environments, in the speed of those environments relative to mm-hmm. each other. And we find that, in fact, there is a massive difference mm-hmm. in the time frame or experience of the expansion of the whole universe versus what is happening on Earth.
So the Creator's time frame is a different time frame than what we experience here on Earth.
Correct.
Using Einstein's theory of relativity as our base.
Correct.
Okay, so if signpost number one is different time frames, signpost number two is formula. You're using two different formulas to really help us understand this. One of them we've referenced, Einstein's theory of relativity, and then you use a spiral formula. Talk to us why these two formula are important for us to understand how we're going to tackle Genesis chapter 1.
Well, I did not do a lot of explanation of the formula for the spiral. The spiral is found everywhere in the universe, and it's exponential expansion. It's a formula for the half-life of radiation. So it's very much found in nature. And what I did in this analysis is I said, let's take this formula, it is found in nature, and let's try to apply it to events, and let's see the results that we come up with. And the results are excellent. And the chance of that arbitrary formula being right by chance is well beyond probability. It's like 1 in 5 million. So we took the formula and then we looked at how accurate it was for our application of converting between the two time frames, the time frame of the universe and the time frame of Earth, and the events that we know of that occur in both time frames.
So in summary, these two signposts of a time frame, man's or the Earth's time frame versus God's time frame.
Recognizing that they're different.
And signpost number 2, that there are natural formula that engineers and or mathematicians use to understand our world, and applying those to the Genesis account is the background knowledge we need to really move forward in looking at Genesis chapter 1.
Correct. And that formula is not an engineering formula. It's a formula developed by science. Engineering doesn't come up with theories. Engineering deals in facts only. And we take the formulas that science have developed and proven by testing, and we use those formulas to come up with the answers in the environment that we need to address.
So Paul, now that we have these two signposts out of the way, let's look at the beginning of reality, if you will, of God's creation before we tackle Genesis 1. And the beginning is that the time was 0. There really wasn't time yet.
The Big Bang.
That space was 0. There wasn't space as you and I know it or understand it. The gravitational force was extremely large because everything was compounded in a small, minute area, whether God was holding it or we weren't there, but the reality is there was a strong gravitational pull, and the temperature was very hot. Is that a true assessment of what these beginning conditions were like?
That was the environment.
The environment in which God created.
Of what science calls the Big Bang.
Mm-hmm. So again, time was at 0. Time, as you and I know, didn't exist. Space was at 0. Space, as you and I know, didn't exist. Gravitational pull was very compact, and then the temperature was very warm.
Right. And this was not an environment that was around for much time. It was an instance, and it was the instant of the Big Bang. And what was before is beyond our capabilities.
So it's important for our viewers to know that the Earth has not yet been made. And that's
Correct.
why, going back to signpost number 1, time frame is important, because Earth has not yet been formed or fashioned.
Correct.
It is yet to come. So we're only looking at it from the time frame of God, from the universe or God's perspective.
We can't make any comments on it from Earth's perspective.
It has yet to be
Right.
formed.
Right.
So Paul, in the presentation we're about to see that you deliver, you summarize for us the 6 days of creation from a biblical account. Yet at the same time, you show a scientific, quoting popular journal Scientific American, in showing how these two worldviews actually work in harmony or in confluence. They work together when you apply these natural formula and Einstein's understanding. They're not contradictory, they're actually complementary. Is that correct?
I would perhaps say that there are events that are documented in Genesis. Let there be light. And that event is also identified by science at a certain time. So we can look at these different events that occurred on day 1, day 2, day 3, and see what science says when that occurred. And going through that, using that natural formula, we find that science agrees that on day one, the universe cooled sufficiently for photons or light to escape in the universe.
Yeah, but of course scientists wouldn't call it day one. They would list it as
Right.
18 billion years
Right.
or 16 billion years ago or 14, something of that nature.
Right.
But from God's perspective, it's day one.
Right.
And that's an important distinction, because what you're saying is when God is looking at his handiwork, his creation, he sees it as 6 days. This event happened on day one, day two, day three, so on and so forth. Science is looking at it from this perspective, looking back towards the beginning, and their time measurement is actually in the billions. So depending if I'm looking at from the vantage point of God as 6 days, or the vantage point of humanity looking backwards, it is billions of years. Again, that's why the time frame is so vitally important in our
It
understanding.
is, you might say, what people have missed in the past when they tried to figure out 6 days and rationalize that with billions of years. You got to analyze what the environmental conditions were that you are talking about. That's so crucial in engineering. And when we analyze this and do a proper job, we find out that we do not have a mismatch.
Yeah.
We have a correlation between the two.
Yeah. So what we find is that God literally did make all that is within 6 days, 24-hour days, but from humanity's perspective, looking backwards, as time dilation takes effect, we are looking at really between 14 and, let's say, 16
Between
billion
13
years.
and 20 billion years. Yeah, and God is relating to us through Moses, his experience of doing the creation of the universe.
So Paul, this material is so tremendous, very important for the church to understand that science and the Bible are not at odds, but they're actually working together, and I do appreciate the amount of time, energy, and mental thought you've given to this, so thank you so much. And I hope that you enjoy Paul Zachary's presentation of where was the Creator when the Big Bang went off.
Hello, my name is Paul Zachary. I am a retired engineer, and I've been in engineering for about 35 years. I have several patents to my name, and most recently I was working for 6 years at Boeing on the new 787 airplane, which was an exciting experience. I'm also a Christian, and I've been watching, observing the dilemma on Genesis 1. And it is a dilemma where God tells us that He created the universe in 6 24-hour days. And that's caused a lot of stumbling. And I'd like to take a look at it using engineering tools, which I think is unique and has never been done before. Basically, if we look at the Genesis, I call it the Genesis dilemma. Genesis 1 is God's introduction of Himself to mankind. He's saying, I created the universe, and He's telling us about His experience. And He's doing that, of course, through Moses, which He inspired to write down the Genesis 1 account. On the other hand, man's science tells us the universe is nowhere near 6 days. As a matter of fact, it's 6 trillion days old, based on the best estimate. So we have 6 days versus 6 trillion days. Well, one of these answers is really wrong. Or is it? Let's take a look. And let's do a engineering analysis of the latest science and look at Genesis and see if we can get a perspective on this. So we're going to be analyzing Genesis from an engineering perspective, incorporating the latest scientific findings, in particular Einstein's laws. And the goal is to show that engineering, science, and Genesis are not incompatible, despite 6 versus 6 trillion. They are compatible now that science has finally caught up to Genesis 1. And using standard engineering techniques, straightforward problem, solvable by application of science's latest findings in space and time. It's a straightforward application. Science, you need to understand the difference between science and engineering. Science uses theories, mathematics, and experimentation to understand the universe. Engineering is not in that mode. Engineering applies science's discoveries in mathematical form to produce useful products. Engineering is therefore called an applied science as opposed to science. If an engineer comes up with new theories, he's not going to be in his job long. That's not what he's supposed to be doing. He is supposed to be dealing with the facts only. So let's talk about the steps that an engineer would take when confronted with a new project, a product, or a problem. The first step would be to analyze the conditions that exist that a product will have to operate in, the physical environment. If the engineer does not fully understand the physical environment or overlook something here, the resulting design may be fatally flawed. Extra time ensuring complete understanding of the impact of the physical environment on the product is critical. So he does that analysis of the physical environment that his product will have to operate in, and then he applies the appropriate formulae for that physical environment with his product. And those formulae and the data that he looks at has been discovered, verified by science, and he uses that to do his design, solve his product. And this is an example of what he may use. It's a 2,800 page handbook which has in it all the materials that the typical engineer would consider utilizing to match the needs of the environment. So these are facts. These are proven. These are not, this is not a book of theories. Let me, if I may, take a example of this duplex outlet box. This was designed by an engineer in the United States, made in the United States, cost 19 cents for this box. The plastics and everything that are in it are selected for the environment that the box is going to see. And the box's function is to protect this outlet. And you've all seen those boxes in your homes. This is a waterproof box. This has been designed in the United States, but made in China because of the labor involved in this. This, as I said, is waterproof, and this costs $6. And it's an example of where you have to look at the environment and provide for the environment. And then we have the ultimate example, although perhaps space might be the ultimate example. This is a marine environment that has to withstand immersion in salt water. And this is $100, designed and made in the United States. So we can see by these three examples that understanding completely the physical environment that your product is going to be existing in is of critical importance. And if you don't understand that completely and you start the rest of your design, all of that can be wasted. If you didn't understand that it had to be waterproof and were so excited by how cheaply you could make it, the end product is useless. So we want to use the same type of analysis of examining the physical environment closely in the Genesis 1 account. So in our engineering evaluation or analysis of Genesis 1, we need to take a look at the physical environment. Moses was inspired by God and is conveying to us God's experience, if you would, of creating the universe. And that creation started, of course, in the past at the Big Bang, and it goes through the 6 days that are involved in God's creation from the time frame of the entire universe, not from the time frame of the earth. So again, we find that we've got to completely understand the physical environment. That is very important, and it impacts everything that follows. When science has looked at the universe, they agree that there was a Big Bang that occurred about 13 to 20 billion years ago, which is, of course, calculating backwards from today's time to the past of the beginning of the universe. At that time of the universe, everything was contained in an infinitesimally small plasma of pure energy, which exploded at speeds close to the speed of light, forming space and time as it spread. And we can say then at the Big Bang beginning, time equals 0, space equals 0, gravitational forces became very large as the universe expanded, and the temperature has been estimated by science to be about 10.9 times 10 to the 12th degrees Kelvin. It was very warm. Einstein's theories of relativity were proposed in 1905. They're now laws. They've been proven, so they're no longer called theories of relativity. And his theory at the time was that when you have speeds close to the speed of light or greater than 50% of the speed of light or half of the speed of light, and if you are in the presence of large gravitational forces, both which were present at the Big Bang beginning, our earthbound speed of time is not the same as the speed of the universe's speed of time, and we have to take this into consideration. So we have to look at this phenomena called time dilation. And whenever we are talking about the passage of time, we have to ensure that we understand that relative to other areas. Again, God was not on earth when he created the universe. He was in the time frame of the universe he was creating. So, looking at the physical environment, we find that time on earth passes at a different rate than time in the universe, where Genesis 1 was being related. So times are not necessarily the same, and as we do this analysis of physical environment, we find it is more than we necessarily expected. So time frames are important. If our analysis now that we kind of understand the physical environment, and we look at our step 2, which would be applying appropriate scientific formulae to the evidence. What is the evidence? Well, nobody was around except God for the Big Bang. But we do have one witness, and that is the cosmic background radiation, which is the radiation left over from the Big Bang beginning until today. And it has stretched through all of the expansion of space and time. So we have that value, which is 2.73 degrees Kelvin, which is what's left over from the Big Bang. And we can look at creating a temperature ratio to try to come up with appropriate formula. And if we put the 10.9 times 10 to the 12th over the 2.73 as a ratio of the temperature initially to the temperature today, we come up with 3.99 or 4 times 10 to the 12th as a ratio that we can put in our formula that we are going to apply. What we're going to look at is a formula for the spiral. And the spiral is the most common shape in all of nature. It's the Nautilus seashell, it's the galaxies. The vast majority of the galaxies are in the shape of a spiral. And so it also uses the natural log because it comes from nature. And so we can use this formula to convert earthbound time, looking back to the Big Bang, to the universe's creation time, looking forward from the Big Bang to today. And we have the formula here. The time in Earth days is equal to R, which was that ratio we came up with, to the exponent of minus LT. And the T there is Genesis days. So we're just using this formula to convert. And we're going to see, does this formula help us? So again, to emphasize, Einstein tells us that time frames matter. Genesis time frame is from the Big Bang to Adam. Science's time frame is from Adam or today back to the Big Bang. So we have two different time frames existing. And it's important that we recognize that on our analysis. Now let's see if there's any other evidence that we can add to this analysis. Okay, in this slide, we are looking at events that occurred that are referenced in Genesis time, Genesis 1 and 2, and see what science says about that event. The first one in day 1 is light. And that's summed up in Genesis 1. God said, "Let there be light," during day 1. Science says, in Scientific American, science has determined that light emerged in the universe 1 million years after the Big Bang, well within the period of time in our scientific time frame that Genesis represents as day 1. So we have a linkage, corroboration for day 1. Well, let's see if we're on a roll here. Let's look at day 2. In day 2, God says, Genesis reveals, that God called the firmament heaven, and that was created on day 2. If we look at the corresponding science time frame, again, Scientific American tells us that the sun and the Milky Way were formed, but not visible on Earth through Earth's opaque atmosphere. But the sun and the Milky Way were formed 4.6 billion years ago. Well, that's right in the space of time from science that represents day 2 in Genesis time frame. So again, we have a linkage, and it looks like our formula is very good. So let's continue on with our success. Let's look at the event in day 3, dry earth vegetation. So this is going to go from the end of day 2 to the end of day 3. And in Genesis, God calls that time the dry earth, and the water seas were created, and God said, "Let the earth bring forth seeds." In Genesis 2 for day 3. Well, again, Scientific American says that between 2 and 4 billion years ago, the Earth cooled, then water formed 3.8 billion, right, within that time frame years ago. So again, collaboration between science and Genesis. Let's look at day 4. On day 4, the heavens became visible from Earth. In Genesis, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth," and it was so. So this was a concept of the lights that had been formed previously were now visible on the earth. And let's look at the sciences time frame. Again, Scientific American says Earth's atmosphere became transparent, allowing viewing of the heavens from Earth between 1.75 and 0.75 billion years ago. Getting monotonous. Again, linkage. Day 5, the fish and the birds. In Genesis, it says on day 5, quote, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth." Genesis 2. And science talks about the Cambrian explosion, which produced all of the species that we know about on Earth 530 million years ago, Scientific American, right within that period for day 5. This was the Cambrian explosion. For the event that occurred in day 6 of the creation was the creation of animals and man. And Genesis says, "Let the earth bring forth the living creatures after his kind, cattle, creeping things." God created man in his own image. And what we had occurring on day 6, according to science, was the Permian extinction. 95% of all species that came out of the Cambrian explosion were wiped out from the fossil record. And the Earth was then repopulated 250 million years ago. Again, Scientific American. So there are a lot of things happening that we are not necessarily generally aware of, but on day 6 we had an extinction and a replacement going on day 6. So I think we're doing quite well. Science and Genesis agree. The universe is about 15 billion years old. Looking backwards from the Earth's perspective, the universe is 6 24-hour days old. Looking forward from the Big Bang, using Einstein's law of relativity to take into account where the 6 days were measured from, the entire universe. 6 days is the only correct mathematical solution, and for the Genesis perspective, and 15 billion years is incorrect for the Genesis time frame. Now, the dates that we're talking about here are going way back, and we don't have observers for these. We don't. All science can do is have an estimate that's based on the processes, what we see happening on the Earth today, and then extrapolating back in time to estimate what was happening, when light emerged, when these events occurred. But they are estimates, and they do change. And again, science is estimating that everything was uniform in the expansion and the creation, which we know is not true, but it's the best that we can do with what we have. Big Bang now is estimated, again, between 13 and 20 billion years. The latest was this March 2013. The Planck space probe led to a new calculation of the universe's age of 13.798 billion years old. What I'm trying to convey is these dates are not fixed, and they are changing. But this is the only account that of the creation of the universe that matches up with so many points of the Genesis record. In summary, the basic question that we have to answer is, where was God when he created the universe, including Earth? And there's 3 possible answers. You can say, well, he was on Earth, but that's not possible. On day 1, Earth was without form, and it runs into all the problems that we had on young Earth, old Earth. We can say God was somewhere else. We get into parallel universes. Transpermia. Sir Fred Hoyle, who did an honest job of analyzing the various processes that we have seen throughout the creation, realized there's no chance that these could have happened just by chance, and he had to conclude that the earth was seeded from somewhere else by some other entity. The Bible doesn't make any reference to any of these, and so this is beyond what we're looking at. We're looking at Genesis 1. The right answer is God was in the entire universe he was creating. Therefore, we have two time frames: God's time frame, the universe, and Earth's time frame within the universe. And Einstein's laws of relativity dictate that there is a massive time dilation effect between those two time frames. Applying time dilation and the formula for the universe's exponential expansion, we see that this allows us to convert from Genesis time frame to Earth's time frame, and confirm this and convert the events that we know about and are referenced to in Genesis, and events that science also has an estimate for when they occurred in the universe's time frame, which is from Earth today going backward to the Big Bang. So what is the end result of this engineering analysis that we've done, looking at the creation of the universe and the events which occurred in it? Well, the results are that we have agreement. We have agreement between the Bible, Genesis, and science. And science corroborates through the various events on the various days what Genesis said is the time period involved when these events occur. So we see God is correct even when we don't necessarily understand him yet. And he addresses this, saying that we have the creation in front of us, which just shouts at us that there is a creator, and God is the creator. And this is just another confirmation of God's accuracy and his sharing with us what he did and how he did it. And it's great to see this finally corrected, that science is now catching up to Genesis.